How did you embarrass them?
Well, I escaped from what was supposed to be a maximum security prison.
How did you do that?
An officer aided me.
August 4th, 2008, Sarah Jo Pender vanished from a maximum security prison without a trace. There were no alarms, no gunshots, and no helicopters. Just a missing inmate and a stunned system. It wasn't magic, it was manipulation. And it worked. That's what happens when female inmates try to manipulate cops and succeed.
Despite numerous tips over these years, and law enforcement's efforts to locate her, several sleuths, media people, blogs, and everything else that's out there, unfortunately, all of these efforts remained unsuccessful.
December 7th, 1969. Inside the walls of a women's prison in Iztapalapa, Mexico City, something unthinkable was about to happen. At 5 p.m., when guards are conducting a routine roll call, Sharon Kin, the woman known across 2 countries as La Pistolera, meaning the gun woman, was nowhere to be found. At first, no one thought much of it. Maybe she was in the wrong spot. Maybe it was a mix-up. But then came the second roll call, and still no Sharon. And that's when the reality hit. She just pulled off one of the boldest prison escapes you've probably never heard about. November 30th, 1939. Born in Independence, Missouri, Sharon Elizabeth Hall grows up in a small town with even smaller dreams for the future. By 16, she's married off to a Mormon man named James Kin. And by 20, she's living a typical suburban life. She had 2 kids, a husband working nights, and a growing sense of boredom she just couldn't shake. But Sharon didn't just daydream about excitement. She made it happen, and it started with blood. March 19th, 1960. Sharon calls the police, frantic. Her husband, James, had been shot in the back of the head. Sharon blamed it on her daughter, claiming that the girl had accidentally fired the gun James often left lying around. Now, authorities, strangely enough, wouldn't press too hard on this. Without proper gunshot residue tests, and with friends backing her story, the death was ruled accidental. And just like that, Sharon collected James's life insurance, $230,000, a fortune back then, and moved on. Or, well, so it seemed. Less than 3 months later, her new lover's pregnant wife, Patricia Jones, turns up dead as well, shot 4 times with a .22 caliber pistol. Now, guess who'd been the last person to see her alive? And guess who'd recently bought a .22 gun? Yeah, our La Pistolera. Despite the overwhelming suspicion, Sharon manages to dodge conviction, helped once again by a lack of hard evidence and a smooth courtroom presence that even charmed the jury. Believe it or not, after acquitting her, one juror actually asked for her autograph, but that trial made the police look a little harder at the death of her husband, James. Now this time they charged her with murder, and Sharon was finally convicted and given life in prison. It could have ended there, but Sharon's conviction didn't stick. A technicality, improper jury selection, ended up overturning the verdict. She was released on bond while waiting for yet another trial. And what did she do with that second chance? Well, she packed her bags, slipped across the border into Mexico under a fake name, and just kept on living. Now in Mexico City, Sharon's murder spree continued. At a hotel bar, she met a man named Francisco Paredes Ordonez. And hours later, poor Francisco was dead, shot twice in the chest in what Sharon claimed was self-defense. But the Mexican authorities weren't buying it. They charged her with murder and eventually sentenced her to 13 years at Iztapalapa Women's Prison. It looked like fate had finally caught up with her, but Sharon Kin wasn't the type to just sit still and accept her reality. And here's where her manipulation skills really came into focus. While doing time, Sharon got friendly with certain prison staff. Rumors say that she would bribe guards, maybe even seduce some of them, playing on their fears and favors alike. It was also whispered that she formed close ties with a former inmate and possibly even a Mexico City policeman, connections that would turn a blind eye when she needs him to. And well, that kind of worked in her favor. The night of her escape, a mysterious blackout conveniently hit the prison. That meant security doors that were supposed to be locked weren't. And that's not all. The guards took hours to report her missing. And by then, Sharon had melted away into the streets of Mexico City and into legend. Investigators believed that she had bribed her way out. Others had speculated she disguised herself as a man, or that even her boyfriend in the Mexican police force helped her slip through the cracks. Some news reports even said that a former Mexican Secret Service agent had a hand in her escape. The truth? No one really knows. Authorities launched this massive manhunt across Mexico, even alerting the FBI about it. But by December 18th, just 11 days later, the official search was called off, and Sharon Kinn was simply gone. For decades, her name is like a ghost in the history of cold case files. And then, in late 2023, an anonymous tip changes everything. It led investigators to Tabor, Alberta, a quiet Canadian town where a woman named Deidre Glabus had lived an unremarkable life for nearly 50 years. Deidre is a beloved realtor, a volunteer, and even a wife. Everyone around her believes that she's just an ordinary, harmless woman. But the thing is, Deidre had already passed away quietly in 2022, at 82 years old. Jackson County investigators eventually secured a warrant to collect Deidre's fingerprints, and when the feds ran them, the match was undeniable. Deidre Glabus was Sharon Kinn. January 17th, 2025, U.S. authorities make a stunning public announcement, finally closing a mystery that had lasted for more than half a century.
The FBI confirmed to me today that a woman named Deidre Glabus died in 2022, and her fingerprints match those of Sharon Kinn.
So today, Sharon Kinn is remembered as one of the longest missing felons in U.S. history. She had manipulated the court system, allegedly seducing police officers, bribing guards, even pulling off an escape so clean that it took decades and a twist of fate to finally catch up with her. That's the kind of story that feels too wild to be real, and yet somehow Sharon made it her reality.
Christa Pike was the youngest woman ever to be sentenced to death in the U.S. and plotting her escape, authorities say she proved she can seduce men into doing whatever she wants.
It's March 2012. Inside the cold walls of Tennessee's only women's death row, a dangerous plan's taken form. Christa Pike was already infamous as the youngest woman sentenced to death in modern U.S. history. But she didn't just want to sit around and wait for that clock to run out. This time she had bigger plans. A plan that involved a prison guard, a lovesick outsider, and a bold attempt to escape the unescapable. But to really understand Christa Pike's story, we gotta go back to the beginning. Born on March 10, 1976 in Beckley, West Virginia, Christa really never had much of a chance. Her childhood was a blur of neglect, violence, and betrayal. And by 12, after the death of the only person who ever truly cared for her, her grandmother, Christa's life would take a really dark turn. She bounces between unstable homes, picking up a drug habit, dropping out of high school, and eventually landed in juvie. So desperate for a fresh start, she enrolled in Job Corps, a government program meant to give troubled youth a second shot. Instead, what it gives Christa is the stage for a crime so brutal, it shocks the nation for years. You see, at Job Corps, Christa found two things: a boyfriend, Daryl Shipp, and an enemy, Colleen Slemmer. Now, Daryl and Christa weren't just two teenagers in love. They had a dark obsession. The kind with occult and devil worshipping? Yeah, well, it pushes Christa further off the edge, you see. And with her growing paranoia toward Colleen, it sets the stage for a horrific, blood-soaked scene that Christa would bring to life with her own hands. January 12th, 1995, Christa lures Colleen into the woods under the pretense of a peace offering. But dear God, what happened next would be pure horror. For over a half an hour, Colleen was taunted, beaten, slashed, and carved. Christa even etched a pentagram into her chest. Finally, Christa would end with a piece of asphalt, crushing it into Colleen's skull, and then chillingly pocketed a fragment of her victim's bone as a trophy. Now, Christa didn't even bother hiding what she'd done. She bragged about this, showed off that piece of skull at school, and within 36 hours, police had her in custody. She confessed to everything, no hesitation, painting them a clear picture of her anger, cruelty, and disturbing pride in her actions.
During the interview, she's very giddy, laughed, very cooperative. She wanted to tell us all about it, but she was giddy. It was a happy thing for her. It was the greatest thing ever, and I've never seen anybody else like that. At
her trial, the jury didn't need long to reach a verdict. March 1996, Christa Pike was convicted of murder and conspiracy. She was sentenced to death by electrocution, becoming the youngest woman on death row at just 20 years old.
There is nobody that's going to take me out of this prison and send me to Disneyland to live.
But if anyone thought prison would tame her, they didn't know Christa Pike. While locked up, she attacked another inmate, nearly strangling her to death with a shoestring during a fire drill. She laughed it off during a phone call with her mother, talking about how the woman's eyeballs bugged out. But this wouldn't be enough chaos for Christa. By 2012, guards discovered that she was plotting something much bigger, an escape. Somehow, while behind thick prison walls and through layers of restrictions, Christa had spun a web of manipulation, and at the center of it were two very different pawns. Donald Kohut, a New Jersey guy who became obsessed with her through prison correspondence, and Justin Heflin, a rookie corrections officer who also fell under her spell. Kohut, smitten beyond reason, started driving 1,700 miles round trip just to visit Christa once or twice a month. That relationship grows in secret letters, whispered plans, and eventually an idea to break her out of prison. Now the plan was simple, but kinda reckless. Kohut would bribe Heflin. Heflin would create a duplicate prison key, and Christa Pike would walk right out of death row. Now it might have actually worked, but prison walls are always listening, and before they could even set this in motion, investigators caught wind of the whole plot. A joint operation between the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, New Jersey police, and prison officials quietly unravel the entire conspiracy, and thankfully they catch it before anybody made a move. March 2012, you had Donald Kohut arrested in New Jersey, charged with bribery and conspiracy to commit escape, and later given 7 years behind bars. Meanwhile, Justin Heflin lost his job, faced charges, but cooperated enough to avoid prison time. On the other hand, Pike wasn't charged for anything, but everyone knew she had set it all in motion. Today, Christa's still on death row at the Deborah K. Johnson Rehabilitation Center. After nearly 30 years in solitary confinement, she recently won a settlement that gave her a little more freedom. Meals with others, time outside her cell, even a prison job if she behaves. But the truth is, some wounds never heal. Not for Colleen Slemmer's family, nor the people Christa pulled into her darkness. Her execution date is still a mystery, but whenever it happens, Christa Pike will remain a haunting reminder of how manipulation doesn't stop at prison, and how sometimes, even behind bars, danger finds a way to slip through the cracks.
Susan Smith, the killing mom, caught paying off fellow inmates to play guard while she, Susan Smith, enjoys sex romps with prison girlfriends in cells, closets, even the jailhouse freezer.
We take you to August 2000, 5 years into her life sentence. Susan Smith, the woman who once captured America's attention with tearful pleas for her missing sons, was making headlines again. But this time it wasn't about the lies she told on national TV. Oh no, it's about what's happening behind those prison gates. Turns out Susan didn't stop being manipulative when she got into prison, setting up a whole new stage for it. Now, before we get into this scandal, we gotta go back to the crime that stunned the world. October 25th, 1994. Susan Smith tells police that an African-American man had carjacked her at an intersection in South Carolina, speeding off with her 2 boys, Michael and Alex, still strapped into the back seat.
When he made me get out of the car, I tried to get my children. I just begged him, please let me take them. And he said no, he didn't have time because they were in car seats and it was going to take time for me to get them out of the car seat.
For 9 agonizing days, this woman goes on television crying for their safe return. But it is all a lie. Behind the cameras, behind the pleas, Susan knew exactly what was going on. Now, she had let her car roll into John D. Long Lake with her son still inside, drowning them both. Now, dear God, you must be asking, why would a mother do such a thing? Later investigations are going to tell you that she was trying to clear the path for a relationship with a very wealthy man, one who very clearly didn't want kids. 1995, a jury finally finds Susan guilty of killing her boys. She's given life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. At first, they put her at the Camille Griffin Graham Correctional Institution, and it wouldn't be long before the trouble started. Inside here, Susan didn't exactly fade into the background. If anything, she found new ways to get attention and break the rules. In 2000, she confessed to having sex with a prison guard, 50-year-old Houston Cagle. A year later, another officer, Alfred Rowe, also admitted to having a sexual relationship with her. Both men faced criminal charges. One spent time behind bars, the other was given probation. Meanwhile, Susan was transferred to Leith Correctional Institution because now they got to try to keep her out of trouble. Spoiler alert, it didn't work. Former inmates later revealed that Susan had a knack for sweet-talking people and for getting what she wanted, kind of like my ex-wife. According to a former cellmate, Susan even paid other inmates to smuggle drugs for her. She said,
"I've seen Susan do everything. Snort, booty bump, swallow, shoot. I've seen her do it all. My main purpose was to bring her pills."
Another woman recalled how Susan leaned on her charm to get pills tucked inside cheeks and passed along through the prison like candy. And so, like that, in a place where most people lose everything, Susan was over here pulling some strings. But prison life wasn't just about a scandal for Susan. We had those reports on discipline. Plenty of them, actually. Infractions for drug use, self-mutilation, unauthorized pin use, you name it. Each time she lost privileges. No phone calls, no canteen, no visits. Despite it all, she still tried to improve her image. After all, she is still clinging to hopes of getting parole, right? So she earned certificates in horticulture, custodial work, and even completed a work keys program. She took jobs inside the prison, most recently working as a ward keeper assistant. Yet the disciplinary records painted a different picture, one of someone who's still fighting the rules, looking for a shortcut. But Susan didn't see it that way. You see, in her mind, the world is just out to get her. By 2015, Susan writes a letter to the state newspaper. She insisted that she wasn't the monster the world believed her to be. She said,
"I loved my boys. There was no plan. Something just went very wrong that night."
But even then, critics noticed her words seemed focused more on how she was perceived than on the son she lost. So as her parole date approached in 2024, Susan makes another move. She reaches out to her ex-husband, David Smith, asking if he's going to support her release. He doesn't.
Case number 34, Susan Smith.
I want to say how very sorry I am.
And when parole was officially denied in November 2024, witnesses said that Susan threw a tantrum in her cell. Meanwhile, one of the former guards who fell for her manipulation, Alfred Rowe, spoke out publicly. He supported keeping her behind bars, saying,
"She's learned a lot in prison, but mostly how to be a better criminal."
I think she's still of that mindset that she could manipulate anybody she comes in contact with.
So you think Susan Smith could kill again if she's freed?
I think so.
Today, Susan remains at Leith Correctional Institution more than 30 years after she rolled her car into the lake with her two poor little boys inside. Behind these prison walls, her story becomes something very different. Less about grief and more about control, survival, and seduction. And even locked away, Susan proves that she still has the power to pull people into her orbit until the consequences catch up with her all over again. We go back to July 24th, 1960. Just another morning at Holloway Prison in London. Or at least it should have been, because by 7:30 a.m., a woman nicknamed the Queen of the Underworld was making her move. Zoe Progel, who'd spent her life breaking rules and charming her way out of trouble, wasn't about to let prison stop her. Not when she had a plan. Not when she had a rope ladder hidden just beyond the gates. And definitely not when she had a boyfriend and a little poodle named Fifi waiting on the outside. Before her daring escape made headlines, Zoe's story started in much rougher places. March 28, 1928, born in London's East End, Zoe grows up in complete poverty. Her childhood sucks. It's a blur of hunger, chaos, and police visits to their crumbling basement flat. And by 6 years old, she's stealing food to just survive. By 13, she's breaking into houses. But Zoe wasn't just trying to get by. She wanted more. After a brief glimpse of a better life during the wartime evacuation to the countryside, where she was hosted by a very wealthy family who fed and clothed her well, Zoe then decided, yeah, she's not going back to poverty. One way or another, she's gonna be rich. So as a teenager now, Zoe's working in the seedy nightclubs of post-war London. It's here that she meets Billy the Cat, a professional burglar who teaches her everything he knew. And before long, Zoe's running with some dangerous crowds, pulling off burglary, shoplifting sprees, even stealing whole truckloads of goods off the docks. She once made off with a haul of fur coats worth 250,000 pounds. No small fortune at that time, and she becomes highly skilled as well. Now she can fake a posh accent to charm jewelry shop clerks, using chewing gum to stash stolen rings, and even outsmart the sharpest of store detectives. In short, Zoe wasn't just another thief, she was an artist. But street smarts aren't always going to save you from getting caught. Zoe would bounce in and out of prison, serving time for burglary, robbery, and fraud. Now, while she was good at stealing, she was just as good at winning people over, including the prison staff. Oh man, each time she landed back inside, Zoe put on her best act. Model inmate, polite, hardworking, and trustworthy, and people bought it every time. But when she was sent back to Holloway in 1960, Zoe decided this would be different. This time, she wasn't going to do any time. She had to escape, and within weeks of arriving, she already earned trust and got a job that had rare privileges and rare access. While cleaning the senior medical officer's office, Zoe found a phone line that connected straight to the outside. Now, she used this to call her boyfriend Barry and set this whole plan in motion. On the morning of July 24th, 1960, as guards are going about their usual routines, Zoe made her move. She scrambles up a pile of coal, scaled a 7-foot internal wall, and just raced toward the outer boundary. On the other side, we had Barry waiting with a metal ladder and a rope. Zoe grabs on and climbs like her life depends on it. Meanwhile, two of her friends almost blow the escape as they'd position themselves in a car at the main gate to watch the event and obviously draw the guard's suspicions. But Zoe doesn't hesitate. Oh no, she dropped into a getaway car and disappears across the bomb site, speeding off toward freedom. Guys, for the next 40 days, Zoe stayed ahead of the law. She dyes her famous blonde hair red and hides out in a caravan parked out by the sea, getting to reunite for a brief, precious moment with her daughter, Tracy. But freedom doesn't last long, and she was caught after police spotted her driving a stolen car with fake plates. Well, they arrest her and send her right back to Holloway. Only this time, they're not falling for any model inmate act. They slapped an extra 18 months onto her sentence and made it clear Zoe wasn't fooling anyone anymore. So now inside, Zoe has to try something new. She decided to reform her ways for the sake of her children. Well, sort of. She writes an autobiography, Woman of the Underworld, telling her life story with a mix of grit and glamour, and a few extra colorful details, courtesy of her tabloid editor. Now, after her release, she tried marriage again, but unfortunately it ends in a heartbreak and even domestic abuse. Eventually, Zoe slips back into her old habits, fraud, shoplifting, petty crime. The cycle was pretty hard to break, and she finds herself in prison yet again. She reportedly died sometime before 2021. Zoe Progel didn't just live outside society's rules. She lived outside its expectations. She broke into homes, charmed her way past guards, scaled prison walls, and for a little while, outran the consequences. But like many stories of the underworld, hers wasn't just about adventure, but about survival, about clawing her way back toward a better life, even when the odds and her own choices kept pulling her back down.
Tonight, a convicted killer is on the loose and a prison guard's now under arrest.
That guard is accused of helping the woman escape yesterday from the Rockville Correctional Facility.
Man, it's August 4th, 2008, and where the hell was Sarah Jo Pender? She'd slipped right past the guards at Rockville Correctional Facility, hidden in plain sight wearing civilian clothes, smuggled in by prison officers she had quietly seduced. No joke. She hops into a van, ducks under the seat, and disappeared through the prison gates without anyone even glancing twice. And by the time they realized that she was even missing, oh, she was long gone. An inmate count triggered a full lockdown, and panic spread everywhere as they all wondered how this could have happened. After all, Sarah here's not just any inmate. She was serving 110 years for 2 murders that had shocked Indianapolis back in 2000. Now, she was supposed to be locked away for life, but now, with a little charm, a little planning, and a lot of nerve, she had rewritten her script. But to understand how Sarah Jo Pender pulls off one of the most daring prison escapes in Indiana history, and how her story's still stirring up controversy years later, we gotta go back to where it all began. Sarah wasn't the kind of person you'd expect to end up behind bars. She was intelligent, a Purdue University student, a girl with a good job, and a family who loved her. But somewhere along the way, things got twisted. She drops out of school and falls for the wrong guy, Richard Hull, a man with a long rap sheet and a temper. And by the time they get into a small house on Meikle Street with their two roommates, Andrew Cataldi and Trisha Nordman, things were already messy. But it would all be on October 24th, 2000, where things reached a point of no return. Now, Hull claimed that he got into a fight with Cataldi, and then a shotgun, the same one Sarah had purchased earlier that day, was used to end two lives. The roommates, Cataldi and Nordman, are both gunned down. When Sarah comes home, the bodies are already loaded onto a pickup truck, but instead of calling the police, she stayed, and then drives with Hull and dumps the bodies like garbage into a dumpster on South Meridian Street. Sarah would later say that she stayed out of fear, and that Hull, towering and violent, could have easily made her the third victim. But nobody believed her, and just like that, her decision to stay sealed her fate. Now, she was given 2 counts of murder alongside Hull. But that's not all, because prosecutors needed a story to get the conviction, and they found one. Sarah wasn't just present, they said. She was the mastermind. Larry Sells, the lead prosecutor, tells the jury that Sarah Jo Parker wasn't just guilty. She's like a female Charles Manson, pulling the strings while Hull pulled the trigger. The evidence they were holding was this suspicious letter, allegedly written by Sarah, confessing to the murders, and the testimony of a jailhouse informant who claims Sarah confessed to him during a hospital visit. So on August 22, 2002, the jury finds her guilty and she's given 110 years. Meanwhile, Hull takes a plea deal, claiming that he was manipulated, and only got 90 years. By 2008, Sarah's locked up for years, and she's kind of done waiting. Behind bars, she builds quiet alliances with a guard named Scott Spittler and a former inmate and friend named Jamie Long. She promises Spittler $15,000 to help her disappear. On August 4th, 2008, they execute their plan. Sarah changes outfits in the gym, ditches her prison uniform in the ceiling tiles, hides it under a van seat, and was driven right out of Rockville's gates. Long then picked her up in the parking lot, handed her some cash, and drove her straight to Indianapolis. For 5 months, Sarah's living under a new name, Ashley Thompson, renting a modest apartment in Chicago, blending into a life that almost seemed normal, until a neighbor saw her on a rerun of America's Most Wanted. No joke. 2 hours later, the Chicago police storm in, and Sarah Jo Pender's second life was over.
Leading the way back to Indiana, 2 state troopers and an unmarked police car, bringing convicted murderer and prison escapee Sarah Jo Pender back to an Indiana state prison.
So after her capture, Sarah spends more than 5 years in solitary confinement at the Indiana Women's Prison, with no visitors, no prison jobs, and just endless isolation. Nothing but time to sit there and think and wonder how everything went so wrong.
Knowing what you know now, would you go back and do it all over again?
If I had the mind frame then that I have now, absolutely not. I escaped because I ran out of hope. And when you lose hope, desperation follows.
2018, she's quietly transferred back to Rockville, a ghost of her former self. But despite it all, Sarah decided to continue fighting, insisting that she wasn't the monster they made her out to be. And over time, the case that seemed so ironclad started to look different. Richard Hull, the man who pulled the trigger, eventually confessed in writing that he had acted alone. But what about that damning letter from Sarah that sealed her conviction? Well, it turned out it was forged by another inmate, Steve Logan, who admitted in 2019 that he was manipulated into faking it. Okay, and the jailhouse snitch who testified against her? Well, he also lied. Turns out that he had a handwritten snitch list offering to sell out 17 other inmates in exchange for a lighter sentence. And remember the prosecutor that built the case, Larry Sells? Well, he changed his mind. Yeah, after decades in law enforcement, Sells said that he had never seen anything like it. He says,
"I've come to the conclusion that there definitely exists a reasonable doubt as to Sarah's culpability. I believe there's reasonable doubt. If you look at the evidence."
I think the only fair thing to do to correct an injustice, a major injustice in this case, is for the prosecutor's office to agree to set aside the convictions.
But by then, it was too late. The courts denied Sarah's appeals, and the legal system that locked her away wasn't too eager to admit it might have made a mistake. Sarah Jo Pender's story is not that simple. She made terrible decisions, stayed when she should have run, helped cover up a crime when she should have screamed for help. But was she really a puppet master? Or just a scared woman who fell in love with the wrong person and paid the price for it? Either way, today Sarah's sitting behind bars, still fighting for a second chance, and still living in the shadow of a nickname she may have never deserved, the female Charles Manson. And you know what? The world keeps turning, forgetting that sometimes the truth is messier, harder, and sadder than the stories everyone likes to tell.